Uh, my name is Tesfa Hyla. I'm on the EYMP core team, and I'm joined by Terry.
Hi everyone, I'm Teresa Johannes. I'm on the group mentoring team as well.
All right. So today we'll be obviously focusing on the topic at hand on Eritrean and Black. Before we dive into that, we'll do a little introduction about EYMP. We have some folks with us today that are joining us for the first time. So we'll explain what EYMP is. And then we're going to frame up our discussion. To frame it up, we'll start with an icebreaker where we'll take the time to define some key terms, and that'll help us be prepared for the terms which you'll hear during the panel discussion. And then we'll wrap the panel discussion up with some takeaways and what our actions are, or actions that we can take going forward. And then we'll wrap up. I think we've got some reminders. Terry, you want to run us through those?
Yes, most definitely. So a few things to keep in mind for today's conversation. This topic is a conversation that we felt that our community needed to have, so we're having it today. EYMP is a multi-generational organization. Joining us today, we have mentees that are as young as 10 years old, and even the parents of these children here. So this conversation needs to be appropriate for everyone. Stay apolitical. We would like this space to be inclusive. Use the chat function and raise your hand. That way we'll know to reach out to you if you have anything you would like to share with the group. And then most importantly, stay muted unless you're speaking. We have a large group joining us today, and we want everyone to be able to speak.
Perfect, absolutely. Yeah, we want it to be interactive, folks. So although we were asking you to stay muted, the chat function allows you to share your thoughts and provide input. And then we'll have some time towards the end for folks to speak up and maybe ask a few questions of our panelists. And for that, we'll ask you to raise your hand using the raise your hand feature in the Zoom meet. So what is EYMP? For those of you who are mentees and mentors and parents, clearly you know what EYMP is. But if this is your first time joining us, we wanted to take just a few minutes to explain what EYMP is. So EYMP is the Eritrean Youth Mentorship Program. Our mission is to provide youth mentorship for the Eritrean American experience. Our vision is to provide a platform where young Eritreans feel comfortable expressing themselves freely. They're able to seek guidance and support and develop their personal values that can support a successful future. In terms of our program structure, we have three facets. The first one being individual mentoring, where a mentor and a mentee spend about 12 months building a relationship. They'll discuss various topics that are of interest, obviously, to the mentee, right? So that can be social, school, cultural, anything else that may be going on in the mentee's life. Now we've got group mentoring. So this is obviously a larger form where the mentees, mentors, parents, anyone really in the Eritrean community can come together to discuss a multitude of topics. Topics can range from health, self-esteem, financial literacy. We've done a pretty good job in holding these relatively regularly, at minimum once a quarter. And then last but not least, community building. So this is where mentors and youth come together to build connections and give back to their community. Again, any member of the community can attend a community building event. So that just gives you a brief introduction to what EYMP is and what we're here trying to do. And today, we're here to facilitate a conversation. And so this fits into our group mentoring and community building facets. So we're going to dive into an icebreaker here. Tara, you want to walk us through the icebreaker?
Yes. So today's icebreaker will be 5 quick quiz questions. So if you're familiar with the polling option on Zoom, you'll see the questions and you'll submit your answer. Take 2 to 3 minutes to answer these questions, and then we're going to follow up with a short review. Starting now.
If you were unable to see it, please put it in the chat and we'll get you some help. We'll take about 1 more minute or so to wrap up.
It looks like we're waiting for about 10 more people to finish the survey. We're waiting on you, so go ahead and finish it up.
Next time we'll have Jeopardy music.
Or Guayla.
I like Guayla a lot better, actually.
Okay, so we can go ahead and share the results. Interesting. Okay, so let's start with question number 1. The terms race and ethnicity can be used interchangeably. So most of the group has answered false, and the answer is false. So while both terms are technically social constructs, race is generally used to categorize a person's physical characteristics, such as skin color, bone structure, while ethnicity describes cultural factors such as ancestry, language. It can usually be distinguished on the basis of language, family structure, religious beliefs, cuisine, as well as national origin. 2, stereotypes are accurate descriptions of a group of people based off of cultural norms. So most of the group has answered false, and the answer is false. Stereotypes are an oversimplified generalization about a particular group of people that can be based on race, ethnicity, age, gender, basically any characteristic. Number 3, discrimination is an unjustified negative act toward an individual or group. Now, I know everyone meant to put true. I think one person got that mixed up. Discrimination is an unjustified negative act toward an individual or group. There's so many examples of discrimination in society today here in the United States. I think most common is whitening names for applications and how whitening your name increases your chances of getting hired. or even how students of color in public K through 12 schools are disproportionately disciplined compared to their white counterparts. Number 4, Black people can have racial prejudice. Answer is true. Prejudice is an unjustified negative attitude toward an entire group of people, and it's often based on ethnic or really racial minorities. Now, this one's kind of split. Black people can be racist. So, the answer is false. We can have prejudice, but we can't be racist since we don't have the authority to enforce discrimination against another group. All right, so let's go to the next section.
Thanks, Terry. I think that was helpful to frame part of our frame up here, leading to our panel discussion. So with that said, we want to take a minute and frame up our conversation. There's quite a bit going on. This has been one heck of a year in our world today, and so leading into the panel discussion, we want to frame up where we are and why we're talking about this. So with that said, well, for many years, African Americans have painstakingly been fighting for their rights, beginning with slavery to Jim Crow, the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s, defunding of vital public resources in the 80s, the Equal Rights Act, just to name a few. And now, with the inequalities in our healthcare system and the continued acts of racism, we have recently seen the boiling point of racial inequalities come to the forefront. Protests spurred by the killing of George Floyd and countless others were in the headlines for weeks. This has jump-started the dialogue that has brought us here today. We are community members in various cities across the United States that have experienced covert and overt racial inequalities, hence begging the questions. How does this apply to us as Eritrean Americans? What are we doing about it? So without further ado, let's jump right into it. We have a great group of individuals here with us today to engage in the dialogue on these topics. So with that, our panelists.
We'll start in order. We'll start with Deborah. Please just give us a little bit of information about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deborah. I am originally from Seattle, Washington, and I currently live in the Washington, D.C. area. So I've been here for 3.5 years. I study at the University of Washington, and I'm currently working in education technology. A huge part of what I believe to be my purpose and passion is working with youth, specifically youth of color and Black youth. And so I'm excited to engage in this dialogue. I've had this conversation with many different people of different backgrounds over the course of the last few years, and I'm really appreciating how the narrative is starting to change, and I'm happy to be here.
Nothing much. How are you?
Thank you, Deborah. Just folks, just a quick reminder before we keep going, just make sure your phones are on or your lines are on mute. Hanok, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hanok. I am originally from Silver Spring, Maryland. Right now, I work with youth in recovery from substance and alcohol abuse. And prior to that, I was working with youth in mental health crisis. In addition to that, I also do spoken word poetry. I think that, and I always embrace that, that I think youth in particular should have an outlet of expressing themselves. And so, and I'm really excited to be here to just engage in this conversation and to share with you all. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Hanok.
Hi everyone, my name is EYMP Abdullah. I'm a high school student from PG County, Maryland. Yeah, that's basically it.
Welcome, Zainab. Lydia?
Hi everyone, my name is Lydia. I also go by the name of Haven. I was born and raised in Asmara, and I came here when I was 11. Currently, I work as a program coordinator for immigrant students in high school, but I'm also a counseling student, and I joined EYMP as a part of the group mentoring team.
Wonderful. And
Hi guys, my name is Ababa and I am a mentor and a parent. Two of my children are being mentored as well by EYMP, and I am here because this topic is a topic of high interest for me. I'm very passionate about just, the racial situation that's happening in the United States, and ultimately the well-being of our children and our community at large. So I am happy to be here, and thanks for including me in the conversation.
thank you, Ababa. There seems to be a little static on your line, so I don't know if you can adjust your speaker or not, or your microphone. All right. So thank you, panelists, for introducing yourself. We'll jump right into the conversation now. So our panel discussion will be comprised of two parts. Part one will focus on what it means to be an Eritrean and Black in America. Then part two will focus on, as Black Eritrean Americans, what our role is during the fight for injustice and equality in America. There's a slight typo there, apologies. We've got a selection of pictures here that speak to both of these parts, and I don't want to slow down or hold up the conversation any further. So with that said, we'll jump right into the dialogue here. The first question is open to all panelists, and the question is, what is it like from your perspective being Eritrean and Black in America? Meaning, what is your experience?
Well, to personally speak on this, currently I feel like being Eritrean and Black has brought so much pride within myself and in my community, but I don't believe that pride has always been there. I mean, speaking to my Eritrean side, I would say it's always been there since I was born and raised. I feel like the atmosphere back home, you just can't help but feel that pride. But I never really considered my race that often, at least compared to my nationality or ethnicity.
Great, thank you, Evan. Anyone else on this question?
Yeah, so for me, I love it. I think it's amazing to, to just know your history, to know your culture. But I also think as a Black man, it's been tough. I've been racially profiled by the police. I've been innocently taken away in handcuffs for something that I was, that I did. I was not wrong for. In addition to that, officer almost pulled out he drew for his gun. He didn't pull it out, but he was close to it. And I was accused of driving a stolen car, which was my car. In addition to that, just from growing up Eritrean, I think sometimes it's not easy as well because, I'll just say this, that if you're Eritrean and you're doing great things, I'm always going to encourage you. I'm always going to push and support you. But growing up, I was criticized by my peers for speaking the language, for knowing how to read and knowing how to write. And so, I would go into, my friends' homes, and I could, and I never understood it until I saw firsthand what it was. And basically I would go into homes and their parents were just using me as like this model, oh, he speaks Tigrinya, you need to be like him, and why don't you do this? And, I feel like I can't confirm this, but I feel like sometimes that kind of causes people to despise you or to resent you. And as a result of that, I felt bad because I grew up like that, my parents doing that. And so I just think that, from that experience, it caused me to just kind of keep things to myself, to just be quiet and not really embrace the culture. So there's a good and there's a bad, but that's just from my standpoint.
I really appreciated how Lydia started the discussion with saying that it brings her a sense of pride, because that's the word that came to mind. Personally, I'm grateful to belong to so many different communities, or be able to have a sense of fellowship with people in different communities, so Black people as a whole. And then growing up, I was a very, very prideful Eritrean child. And being able to embrace both of those parts of myself has been amazing, but more so in my adulthood. Whereas growing up, I think it was very confusing. That's another word that definitely came to mind, because my Blackness wasn't something that I understood yet. And so I felt like there were almost gatekeepers that didn't allow me to belong to Blackness. I think it took me a while to really understand what it even meant to be Black, and then to claim a sense of ownership my identity. So, again, two words that come to mind are both confusing in my youth, and now it's more so proud.
That's a great point, Deborah. Just a quick logistical comment. Of course, a reminder, keep your lines on mute. And then also, audience members, we will have a section towards the end of the panel discussion for you to chime in verbally. But until then, please feel free to use the chat window to list any questions you may have or comments.
So I just wanted to quickly also add to the dialogue. From me, I am a parent, as many of you guys may know, but coming to the US as a teen, as some of the panelists had described, it was a bit confusing because the conversation of race is not a common theme in our culture. We strongly identify with our heritage, and not really having a solid background of just the American legacy. It was very difficult early on to connect the dots, to understand what does it mean being a person of color in the United States. So I would say I was a bit emotionally hijacked by my lack of knowledge, lack of historical perspective. But I would say as an adult, I have been able to connect the dots because of education and different exposures. So it has been a journey. So just wanted to share that perspective.
Thanks, everyone. So I think everyone's been talking about this Eritrean identity and this American identity as if it's separate, and at the same time it's mixed. But do you think that you've experienced any privileges from being an immigrant Black versus someone who's generationally Black, who's descendants of enslaved Africans?
Well, to answer, as I consider myself to be an immigrant from Eritrea, I did experience privilege. One of the privileges being, like, the first experience being that when I had to apply to college, I had the option to take a TOEFL, which is and I don't want to say an easier, but a very much like condensed version of the SAT. And like, I think working in the education field, I've seen so much how the SAT prep and even the actual test is not very much, I don't think kids who are Black and non-Black receive the same amount of prep, or even they're not even culturally prepared to take it. So as an immigrant, I have the option not to take it and go to a well perceived college. And more than that, when I did first come in, I saw a lot of the programs like kind of like aimed at immigrants. For instance, the one I work right now, it's for immigrants, Latin Americans, and from other countries. So, and I have yet to see programs aimed at youth who are preparing them and sending them the opportunities they need to go to a college that is like a competing college. So that's my opinion.
I would add to that conversation where, yes, I have benefited by being an immigrant for many reasons. Early on, I could always identify myself as other, although I am Black, and I affirm that. You know, when you have the accent, you know, people treat you differently. So that has been a privilege. And you know, whether it be you know, through interaction with teachers and things like that. But I think as we start to lose that accent and we start to culturally assimilate, I think we do become more part of the Black American identity, because you don't have that distinct accent or mannerism to help you stand out. So in some sense, I think being looked at as an immigrant, as a foreigner, could be to some advantage. I think people are nicer to you. They try to help you out. At least that's how it was for me when I first arrived in the United States as an immigrant.
To that point, Amaba, I actually was talking to a good friend of mine yesterday, and we were discussing you know, things along this line, and he referenced the Ballad of the Bullet, which is a famous speech by Malcolm X. And in that speech, Malcolm X is talking about how Africans who were migrating or visiting or immigrating and were, you know, perceived as African with, you know, accents and whatnot, were treated better by white Americans and had access to spaces that Black Americans didn't. And so I think when I personally, I was born here, when I think about the privilege that I've endured being of Eritrean or African descent, closer to African descent, I think that systemically I've benefited, because the trauma that was placed onto Black Americans on this soil was something that was in such close proximity, and we see that it's also unresolved. And that's not to take away from the trauma that my parents have endured, my ancestors have endured along the journey of back in Edita and on their way here. But in general, I think that gave me an upper hand. And that's what a lot of our parents tell us when they come here, is that I came here to give you a better opportunity. And we come here with a solid foundation and understanding of who we are, what our capabilities are. My dad would always tell me, you know, you can do anything. You know, you're smart, you have all the capabilities in the world. And that in itself was a privilege, I understand. But I definitely can see how I have been given a privilege to excel.
Yeah, maybe a follow-up there then. So, you know, is this reinforcing a prejudice here? Right, so there's, you know, a bias between Africans and African Americans. Yes or no, and expand if depending on which way you feel.
Can you elaborate? But what part?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we'll take the example of coming in from abroad, coming in from Africa as an immigrant, and you being given or having more of an opportunity versus someone who's third, fourth, fifth generation descendants of slaves, to then say, that same opportunity doesn't apply, or they have a bias that the African first generation or generation zero is going to do better than the African American.
I don't know how much of, I think that's a great question. I don't know how much of a conscious decision or action it is, as much as it is that we are just socialized based off of the systems that are in place. So when our parents come here and are functioning or acting not out of the system that's been in place here in the US that's oppressed Black people, but rather based off of whatever they brought over, I think it makes it easier for us to have a foundation that isn't rooted in that racist prejudice system. And eventually we are subjected to it because we're at these institutions, at these jobs where we're experiencing that type of racial prejudice. But when we are given that upper hand, from my perspective, I think that it's not something that is deliberate. I think it's just because of our experience. I don't know if that.
So I think from my understanding of what you're saying is this could even be broadened to, let's say, Asian Americans being the model minority in the United States. I think we as Eritreans have the tendency to want to adapt that because it benefits us to be other than African Americans that were brought here during slavery. So consciously or unconsciously, I think as a people, we want to be Eritreans first. We want to claim our heritage and then sometimes not even acknowledge the fact that we're Black. And that is, something that we have to reckon with and make peace with, because as long as we live here long term, we have to acknowledge being Black, because that's how the American society sees us, whether we're new immigrants or people, Eritreans that were born here, or whatever the case may be. So that's how I look at your question. I think it does reinforce stereotypes within our community when we feel like we're getting preferential treatment because we're seen as other, although we're Black. That's my contribution.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you have to say, Ababa. I'm going to follow up on what Deborah said earlier. She mentioned the word opportunity. I feel like we come here to America looking for the American dream, the land. It's the land of opportunity. And we come here, work so hard. And you said the opportunities we receive as immigrants are different and they're not offered to the Black Americans that are here. So I guess that kind of, I don't know, I think subconsciously we have this idea of like thinking, why are the people who have been here in this land of opportunity not benefiting from the same programs or benefits that we're receiving? And I guess it kind of further perpetuates the idea, the negative stereotypes we might have on Blacks. And again, not seeing that we're Black, but kind of seeing them as the other. So thanks for that.
So I just want to reach out to Zainab real quick. Zainab, you're the youngest person on the panel. You're currently in high school. You're an Eritrean American, and you're also part of Generation Z. Can you share more about that experience of being an Eritrean American and Black in America today? And is there this great of a divide as we think there is, or is there a bridge?
Well, through going to public school, I have seen kind of a difference between how African American students and African students interact with each other. Well, for me, I wear hijab, so that's the first thing people see. So whenever I would tell people that I'm Black or that I'm African, I would like receive like backlash. People be like, no, you're not, you're Muslim. And I try to explain to them that, like, you know, religion has nothing to do with your ethnicity or your race. But it was just kind of like really hard for me because, especially like in middle school, that was my first time being like in public school. I used to go to Islamic school before that. And it kind of just like made me like always resonate with my Eritrean culture more, since I noticed that like African American students wouldn't really accept me. So yeah, I mean, now I don't like care about anybody's opinion, but I was really young then. I didn't really like, know better.
Zainab, that's sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that just to piggyback off of what everyone else said, I think that sometimes, you know, just growing up, our culture has kind of enforced this bias as well. I can only speak from my experience about how, you know, my parents would always have this stereotype about, you know, African Americans, and you know, and then when I would tell my parents, hey, well, you know, we're African Americans too, and they would say, no, shut up, like this, we are Eritrean. And it was very confusing because when we would have, you know, in high school, or we have those standardized tests or applications, and they would ask for your, you know, for your race, I was always stuck because I wanted to put African American, but then I would always think about what my parents said, and I would always hit other, and then on that line I would put I'm Eritrean. And so I think that you know, I can also relate to I'm sorry, I forgot the young lady's name, but I think that growing up, you know, just even in college, you know, it's really hard to kind of find that identity because, you know, she's right. Like when you go to, you know, being around like Africans, they would, you know, they would say stuff like, oh, well, you're not really African, you know, because they were West African. And so, and then when you try to associate with the African Americans, they would, you know, say, oh, well, you're foreign, you're not really Black, you know? And so it just kind of leaves you stuck because you don't know what to identify as. And so that's just, you know, from my experience.
And do you think that this opinion, I guess, affects the level of civil engagement Eritreans have in the United States?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Do you think this dissociation with Blackness affects the level of like engagement that Eritreans have when it comes to civil rights in the United States?
Yes, I do. I do, because, and I think that it's a generational thing. I can honestly say, like, my father always had like this negative stereotype toward Black people, but that was always based on what he would see in the media and how and what was portrayed. And it was just constantly, like, all the time. And my sister and I had to like sit down with him and educate him and really, but I think that's also from the lack of knowledge. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I can honestly say, you know, I can just think about the thoughts that are running through my parents' mind, like, well, that doesn't apply to us. You know, we're not Black, you know, we're Eritrean. And that being that privilege, that, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say it's privilege. I think that, you know, for a lot of us, you know, including myself, we immigrated here. We didn't have the same opportunities that other people had, you know, like, you know, but our parents did work hard to give us these opportunities. But no, like, I mean, I think that it does cause a dissociation for, you know, civil rights.
I know it's you know, quite poignant that you said what you said about your parents. I mean, you know, there have been many statements that I'm sure many of us have heard growing up from our parents, you know, to say it in Tigrinya, you know, we've heard that, you know, at some point or another. And you're right, it's on one hand quite confusing. It can be frustrating. So you're spot on in bringing that up. I guess to pivot us a little bit here, you know, in Eritrea, we don't talk about race really, right? We talk about our ethnicity. And I think, and this is where I want to hear from you guys, that impacts our ability to discuss it here. All right. Is that in our back, in kind of in the back of people's heads as we're talking about this?
I agree. I think the reason why is often because our parents, although having come through different avenues and countries and having had different experiences, ultimately come from a place where there is no black, white, and other. So that wasn't really a distinguishing factor. And of course, there are other things like gender and class that allow you to see how, where you fall on the spectrum. But because Eritreans, especially our parents or those who immigrated here, aren't well versed in understanding what race is, I think that's where it becomes complicated. My mom, I always tell this story because it's important, but my mom used to tell me that when she first came, and this is in the mid 80s, she would watch the news and she would really be terrified of Black people. Like she would say this out loud, like Black people are out here, Black people are out to get everyone, just this is what she's learning from the news, and this is the narrative that is still pushed to this day, but especially then. And then I remember her saying, it wasn't until I realized that I am Black people that I was able to shift out of that perception of Black people and really understand that, okay, something's not wrong. And I think that that's something that you 100% have to do when you're assimilating and you're coming to, and some people don't do it, but I think that that is the important part of learning about our identity and learning about race, is that understanding what role you play in it, because race isn't something that we get to define. Race is subjected onto us. So, and that's one thing I always say, regardless of if you don't get to decide if you're Black or not, it's essentially the world that uses your Blackness to then decide how they will proceed to do X, Y, and Z. So that's how I look at it.
Well, that's very poignant, Deborah. And I mean, it's, you talk about kind of what your mom was saying growing up, as watching TV. I've got to ask, however, I mean, as a parent on the panel here, what are your thoughts on this? Having lived through the 80s and you've got children, how does this apply?
So I was processing what Deborah was saying. Just from my own personal experience, I think arriving of understanding of just racism in general, it is a multi-layer process that really requires a lot of reading, a lot of talking to people that know. So it is not something that you just arrive in. So I want to be, number one, empathetic to our parents who came here with a dream, and they were tired working to make ends meet. So they didn't have the luxury, right, that we may have right now, that, we've gone to school, we can keep one job and make ends meet, not multiple jobs. So this is not like a blaming session, but I think it is a session of awareness that if we don't have a good foundation of how America existed, I'm talking about the 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow, all of those things that you mentioned early on, it is easy to turn on the TV and look at the news and really fall into that entrapment of stereotype where you think all Black people are bad. And Henok, you touched on our parents telling us, oh, Tom Tsalamti. I mean, how confusing is that? Because we are the Tsalamti, I mean, just that concept alone is very confusing. As Henok mentioned, you're Black as a kid, you want to interact with the Black kids, but your parents are telling you not to, Tom tsallamtu qol'ut or Tom hama'at qol'ut, whatever, terminology they might have used to tell you not to interact. So, for me, it was a process. I have lived here for 33 years and I'm still learning, but I am different today than I was when I first came. And I would say that is due to, number one, myself seeking the information. Secondly, openly interacting with diverse group of people, because that, I think, broadens your perspective. And then for my kids, I make sure that I have an open dialogue. Typically, our conversation is led through reading, through books. I let them ask me any questions because I don't want them to be emotionally hijacked as I was when I first discovered what race was or what racism was. And my exposure was through a book I read on Malcolm X. So imagine that. You know, I do introduce my kids to the topic of race and racism, and they can talk to you at the age of 16, 12, and 10 with confidence and full awareness of what it means, where they fit in it. They are empowered to speak for themselves and advocate for others if they ever see their friends being mistreated or any type of injustice occurring in their little small world. And I think that's how we can move forward as parents and as a community, making a difference. We have to recognize we're Black and we need to be part of the solution. So sorry if I talk too much.
No.
That was great.
Don't apologize.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was great. And, you know, it's great that we have you on the panel because you're able to lend that perspective, right? Without you on the panel, we wouldn't have that perspective. So, you know, in the interest of time, I want to move us to our part 2 here. Right. So our role in the fight for fighting for injustice and equality in America. There was a picture shown a bit earlier highlighting Eritreans protesting injustice against Africans during the 1970s. Some of you may recognize it. It was quite popular on Instagram for a couple of weeks. Now we're in 2020. What's our role? You know, many of our parents may have been protesting in the 70s, but in 2020, it's our turn. So what's our role during the fight for injustice and equality in America?
Being patient is most important. Being patient is most important.
I like that.
I would have to agree, like being patient to kind of process this new information that it might be to some. To add to that, I think Abeba like summarized it pretty well. In my personal, I would just say my role is to kind of further educate myself as I have been. Also, I feel like listening to other people's experience, most of the time I have found that I found a great commonality between myself and the other person. So to just do, just putting yourself in spaces where you're gonna learn other people's experience, being open-minded has helped me a lot in kind of celebrating my Blackness, and as well as advocating for equality in places where representation is lacking. For me, it has to be school. I'm often one of two other Black people in my classroom. So when the conversation of race comes up, I feel like I have to speak on, because I feel like even if you feel like it does not represent you or doesn't affect you, you need to speak on for others, voice your opinions when it matters and show up when it matters, whether that be in protesting, voting, and so forth.
For me, it's a few things, educating other people, not just myself, but just educating other people the importance of self-awareness and positive, affirmations. I think that sometimes we don't know ourselves and we don't know our worth. And so sometimes it's really hard to, be alone. Sometimes, and I think that that's what a lot of us may have experienced, growing up. The other thing is knowing our rights. I think that the other thing is sharing your experiences, because I can assure you that um, you may feel alone, like no one else may have gone through it, but just by you speaking up and having the courage to talk about it opens up the door and encourages the next person to open up. And then before you know it, you have a lot of people who have experienced the same thing. Now, how do you move forward from that? Everybody comes together and says, you know what, this is important to me. How are we going? And then that's how you make moves, and that's how you make noise and make progress forward. So those are my 2 cents.
Just to add to what's our role, I know I could speak for myself. First and foremost is to demonstrate empathy. I think it is in our core as Eritreans to always be on the side of justice based on our historical legacy. We have, as a people, experienced plenty of oppression. In our country, we are passionate about who we are because of our resiliency, because of everything that we have overcome as a people. I often get confused as to why we cannot translate that when we look at the African American struggle. It is not easy to have been forced to come to the United States, not by your choice, where your community was dismantled, where your people were sold like property. Really, if you guys do your due diligence of studying the history, you'll realize that it's no more than really 80 years through Jim Crow and other historical legacies that African Americans have really started to build themselves. So my plea is, let's be empathetic. Let's understand the historical legacy, because it is not something that you could just wipe away. And it is easy for us to say, well, we're immigrants. We came here, we lifted ourselves, we're doing so well for ourselves. Why can't they do the same? You can't undo generational emotional trauma in a very short period of time. So, not to be preachy, but that would be my request of our community. Number one, be empathetic. Don't be so judgmental when you're interacting with African Americans. We have our standards. We want our kids to be good kids. We want them to be productive. I think that's a desire of any parent, of any community. As we are keeping that in the forefront, but also let's be empathetic, realize that they too were brought from Africa. That's our uniting ground. They are from Africa. They are descendants of Africa, the continent that we love, that we're from. So that alone is where we unite. And then once we realize that, we have a sense of empathy, then we will be willing to get our hands dirty and do the work. And the work could be just within our own community. Talk to a friend that may have a jaded view of African Americans. Change their view. Talk to them, educate them. The work also starts with our own children. We need to do the work. We need to educate our children. Don't be afraid to speak up in the workplace. It is not easy. Fear is paralyzing, but it is up to us to find the strength to muster the confidence to speak up, because when we do speak up, I think we make things better for our children and for the next generation, because we are calling this place home. and if it's a place of home, then we have to do the work to make it better for our children and others that look like them. So that is what I would say is what we need to do.
Thank you, Ababa. I think it's really important for us to talk about institutional and systemic racism. Before Deborah speaks, I just want to bring this question to Zainab, since she was out of the chat for a second. Zainab, can you tell us about what Generation Z is doing about being, I guess, civilly engaged in, in civil rights?
So like from what I've seen, we're really active on social media, and like we kind of like made it a tool to raise issues on like social problems in America, and kind of like educating ourselves on racism or civil rights or like racism in general throughout the world. But like in a way that's easier to understand. And I think also seeing like people your age speak out about things, it also encourages you to do so as well. So.
Deborah, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just got really excited hearing Ababa talk. That was just, I mean, wow. Exactly. I know that all of Africa, or nearly all of Africa, has experienced colonization and the trauma that a lot of African Americans or Black Americans have experienced here. And not only have they experienced the trauma, but they were experienced that trauma on land that is unfamiliar to you. And that in itself should be enough for us to really be able to understand why things are the way that they are. So I think I agree with what everyone was saying. I think taking a critical or using a critical lens when assessing why you have certain biases or why you look at certain groups of people differently. And I also think that the work is, I mean, important for everyone to be doing, right? I think ultimately humanity, personally, and I think some people could agree, should be leading towards a place where, you know, there's harmony and love and compassion. And I don't think that's radical or unrealistic, but I think that's very different than what we've experienced. And in order to get there, we have to be exercising things like compassion and investing in communities and people who might not be, you know, someone that you identify with wholly, but someone you want to invest in because you want to uplift them. And personally, I love investing in Black youth, and I don't discriminate on what that Black is, because I personally just feel like that's my duty, and it brings me the same level of joy. And so one thing I just want to make really clear, or I think people can understand through the different type of work that they do and with the different people they work with, is that being Black and identifying with your Blackness does not erase your Eritrean heritage and your background and your identity, and it doesn't water it down, and it won't take away from that. And I think a lot of people operate from fear of diluting that identity. But if it's so, like, it's not something, it's rooted in us, you know, whether you like it or not. And that should be enough to give people the freedom to expand where they, you know, continue to invest.
That's a wonderful point. And I think there are people that grapple with that, that I hope you've given them kind of a path forward here. Just another pivot here. I think we've got some great comments and questions coming in on the group chat. Zufan, you want to help us out with one or two from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a really good question from Alona, and you know, he's asking, you know, he's not sure whether to describe himself as African American because our histories are different. So to the panel, do you believe that we should describe ourselves, you know, any Black African immigrants, as African American, given that our history is not the same as African Americans?
I mean, I could speak for myself. I acknowledge both. I acknowledge the fact that I'm Eritrean, and the fact that I'm Black. And that's usually enough because I'm covering both, you know, and I'm always happy to educate, you know, the historical perspective and my heritage. But at the end of the day, I also have experiences as a Black mom in the United States, as a Black professional in the United States. So that's something I cannot escape. So as a result, I have to identify with both. I don't think it's either or. You could be both and proudly stand in that. That's just my perspective.
I agree with Alba. I think that when I think about it, it's like, yeah, our history might be different, but at the end of the day, that continent where everyone came from is still the same. So you first are African and you are African American, thereby, therefore, here, and so I think that history, when I think about it, it's like any other race, whether it be Asian or, Latino, they associate the same thing as well. I'm not saying that we should follow everyone else, but I think just from my standpoint, I think that we are African first before anything. And I don't think that our history should dictate whether, how we should identify ourselves. So that's just my perspective.
I have to agree as well. First to say, it's really a personal choice, how you feel you identify. When it comes to me, I would agree with Ababa, but I use it more like interchangeably. I would say I'm Eritrean American first. But if it's like on a paper where I have to fill out a form, I would just check African American. Again, use it interchangeably. Eritrean means Black, so yeah.
Great points all. I think this is kind of the point, right? We have many people that grapple with this on a regular basis. Even back to Henok's point about filling it in on a standardized test form, right? And just how you understand or how you identify yourself. So I guess talking about engaging, right? We're Eritreans in the diaspora, or Eritrean Americans, or African Americans, some of which are citizens, some are non-citizens. Do we have to engage in Black and civil rights issues while we're here in the United States? And if so, how?
I think that at the end of the day, it's a choice whether you decide to engage or not. That is your decision. However, the way I think about it is for your generation, whether it be your kids, your grandkids, family members, I always, just from my standpoint, whether you're a citizen or not, I think that down the line, I just feel like you're going to be affected somehow, some way. And I just think that we shouldn't wait until someone who is, I just feel like we shouldn't wait until that happens to you. I think that this should be something just we as humans, I think for you, those who are Eritrean, who are new to this country or who are growing up, I think that is what you are fighting for. It's not about you. It's bigger than you. I think it's just, I don't have any more words after that. I just think that what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And I think that I just personally feel like it is our place to speak up on it.
And I have the view that it is our obligation to be involved, because we are who we are because of the fight that was done before we got here. And we can't, be enjoying the free lunch without contribution. That's just my opinion. If it wasn't for African Americans and their fight for civil rights that really did open up the floodgates for immigration, we would not be here. And I think we have to consciously think about that. Who did the work for us to enjoy the freedom that we are enjoying in the United States? For us to come here, work on our American dream, that's because they paid the price through anxiety, through terrorism that they had to experience, through communities being destroyed. If you guys really engage in the historical legacy, you would have a good foundation. So to me, maybe partly because of my training, I'm a social worker by training, I feel obligated. As long as I'm living here, I'm benefiting from the land, from the sacrifices that others have made. It is my duty, it is my obligation to help build. And despite what's going on, I love the United States, right? So if you're coming from love, you want to build the place that you're living in. So because of those things, I am vested in investing. So I teach my kids to be advocates. My daughter, who's 16, has already been to 2 demonstrations. At 16, she is writing letters to political officials, essentially demanding things. She's seeing discrimination in the school system, particularly targeting Black boys. And she's saying they deserve better. So our voice could be heard in whatever way we feel comfortable with. I think sometimes in our culture, we're scared of being seen or making a scene. We're told to be quiet, keep things on the hush hush. If you feel, okay writing a letter, do that. But please make sure that your voice is heard. I mean, we're obligated to participate because, some of us have lived here for 30 years, 40 years. I mean, we are benefiting by being here. And, and for those parents, if your long-term plan is to make this place home, to make it better for your children, you have to participate. You cannot sit idle and let other people do the work. That's just my opinion.
I can only hope that everyone else is hearing you and trying, maybe vigorously jotting down some notes on how they can engage, because you answered my question dead on. I guess to the other panelists, you heard some examples from Ababa. How do you engage, or how would you like to engage?
I think hearing Ababa, thank you by the way for that. The first step I had to take was educating myself on what the issue is. I don't think you can never educate yourself enough. So always listening to the what's going on, like background history and even current issues. There are kind of fuming the issue to kind of happen and just kind of spreading it. And other than that, just learning what your personal responsibilities are towards this issue. Ababa explained this so well. I think our culture can tell us, be quiet, like don't make too much noise over there. But so if you feel that way, there's so many ways you can do it where you're not out there protesting or anything. It could be just writing a letter to your representative. So first educating yourself and to learning what your personal responsibilities are towards that issue.
Deborah, did you have a comment before I take it from there? Lydia, that was spot on, by the way.
Yeah, I agree with everyone. To identify with the more what would be perceived radical approach, I think it's an obligation personally, and I don't take it lightly. But if nothing else, it is in your best interest to every Black person to take some part in this movement. And as Lydia said, it doesn't have to be very radical. I personally have been involved in different ways. I was a president of our Black Student Union in college, and I was really focused on like diversifying the conversation topics that we had as Black people and having some of those uncomfortable conversations like right now. And then, at my company, I'm now I've just founded our diversity and inclusion effort. And, those are things that are, maybe not the Black Student Union, but are more subtle, but ways that I can say, I want to see other Black people never have to experience either what I've experienced in whatever capacity, or I want to see safe spaces and spaces become created for Black people to have some form of fellowship and spaces to congregate and identify with one another. I want to normalize that. And I think everyone has their own way. Everybody has their own skill set. Everyone has their own resources and assets and connections to get involved at whatever capacity they can, because it's not about, you know, extreme action. It's about finding ways that are realistic.
Well said. Your engagement in school and then post school, post college is needed, at least from what Ababa was saying, for sure. I guess before we start to wrap up, you know, we've got mentees on the line, and obviously EYMP, we focus on the youth. So Zainab, just what are your thoughts on how folks in high school can engage?
You can always like start a club at your high school. You can just even like reposting something on Instagram. You never know, like somebody can read it and then, you know, something like maybe they had some preconceived notions about Black people, and now that has changed just by reading a simple article. Getting engaged with your community, like talking to your family about how you feel. I mean, they might get mad, but you know, it's for the greater good. Like for me, like at family like events, I'm always the one to start like the controversial conversations, but I know they need to be held because I mean, I have like a lot of male cousins, and whether my aunts want to hear it or not, they're raising Black sons and they can be profiled too, you know, they can be victims too. And I mean, I think I just try to do my best, basically.
I think that's all we can ask. That's very well said, and I'm glad you're doing your part. So to wrap this part up, you know, these are heavy topics. These are not topics that you know we take lightly. And as you all are engaging, you also have to think about self and those around you. So how do you cope with these issues? Right? These can be definitely be stressors. What do you do with your family and friends to cope with these issues of racial inequality and injustice?
I would say for me, I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded with like-minded friends and family. So whenever, like you mentioned, that stress of just kind of seeing this happen in the media and outside, just it's very much needed to share and express your feelings and thoughts in a safe space. But for those who might not have that opportunity, I would suggest, I believe EYMP is a great space for this, to reach out to your mentors. If not, I believe the core team is here and needed whenever you would want to share and speak.
Just to add on to the conversation from me, I do seek people that are of like mind. I'm actually hopping on a book club meeting immediately after this. And we are addressing topics that are relevant to what we're talking about. We're actually reading Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? We are at the end of the book, and the moms that are in this book club are all Habesha women who have had zero foundation, but now are very educated because of this book. It is a historical account of what's taking place, what has taken place. So slowly but surely, you know, when I feel a level of stress or anxiety, I jump into action. So that's a small way that I'm making a contribution. My 16-year-old is leading a book club with a bunch of middle schoolers. They too are Habesha kids. The book that they're reading right now is Good Kind of Trouble. Actually, you know, after a very nice quote by John Lewis. And it is about a middle schooler who is caught in kind of complexity of thought of whether she should be involved in the movement or not. Probably similar questions that our young people are asking. And on the other side, my faith keeps me grounded, and I'm a runner, so I really try to find many different ways to keep my mind and my body healthy. So that's it.
For me, the way I cope is first and foremost, I'm just like faith is my foundation through prayer, meditation. I think someone said this before that sometimes we need to be heard and we need to express ourselves. So my form of that is poetry. I go to a lot of spoken word events, and these issues are talked about a lot. And to credit, friends and family also, to be part of a, Bible study group or to have friends who are like-minded, who just are there for you just to hear you out, and share your perspective. I think that's very critical. So.
All great points. I think it's quite important that we find ways to work through this, because the only way we can move forward is if we deal with them, right? So with that said, we're approaching the end of our time period. So first of all, an amazing job by all panelists. You guys have given some great insights on two very strong themes under an overall topic that's heavy to discuss, but I think quite warranted, right? Which is why we're all here today. I'm just gonna go back and share my screen as we wrap up here. So the question is, now what? And as EYMP, I think Lydia, you hinted at this. We are interested in driving action that leads to increasing equality for our communities. And we'd like to add to the resources that are available. But EYMP's not the subject matter expert here. You guys are, right? Not only the panelists, but the folks in the audience, community members. We want to hear from you. All right, so please do share with us if you have good resources or resources that you'd recommend. If you're already engaged in the community and you think there's a civic engagement that would be beneficial for this larger audience, please share. You can reach us through various social media means, as well as through our website. With that, we're going to share this presentation and the resources that we've been compiling. We've got a good list going, but we wanted to wait to hear what you all would share with us. It sounds like Ava's got a book that she's going to share with us for sure. So we'll take all of that, compile it, and then share it, and we'll post through our show, through Facebook and through Instagram that it's available. So, without sorry, Terry, go ahead.
Yeah, so we actually want to take a few questions from the group.
Oh.
Before we wrap up.
I almost forgot. Good point. Thank you.
Is there anyone on the line that would like to ask a question to our panelists? Any last questions?
If there's no questions people are going to ask, I did see an interesting discussion in the chat earlier that talked about how, African Americans, there's a narrative being shared that they're not African, they're just American. So do panelists have any thoughts or opinions on, their stance on that and what maybe we can do to better bridge that gap?
I don't claim to be an expert, but just to give my 2 cents, there is a diversity of thought even within the African American community, depending on where they are in their journey. And I think it is our job to be respectful of where they are. So I would not expect someone to if they're telling me they consider themselves Americans and not African, I'm okay with that. I would probably engage them to better understand why they may be saying that. What is causing them to have that kind of stance. Unfortunately, sometimes it may be because they haven't had the best experience with us and they don't want to identify with us. You know, we do carry our own opinions, and you know, sometimes the way we interact with them may not be the best, you know, just being honest. And partly for them could also be just that painful historical legacy, and they just want to forget about it. They want to just be American, and they don't want to acknowledge that part of their history. So I think it's our job to be respectful of their journey. But yeah, I have heard that too. So that's it.
Thank you, Abu. Any other questions or comments across either theme that we covered today?
I would like to add something, if anyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you, Chuck.
So growing up, I've had the pleasure and the experience of dealing with both. I come from parents who are from Jamaica and both from Africa. So coming here, I've more identified with my Caribbean family because it was more accepting and easier for me to dialogue. My family who came here from the diaspora were very separatist and were not really engaging. So I didn't really relate. It wasn't until I was blessed enough to meet my wife, who was Eritrean, and we have 3 young children. And I found that and since her passing, I lost her in 2013 to breast cancer. So I found myself now having to engage and delve into the culture that is very private. I sometimes have a hard time getting resources, like I'm raising my children to speak Tigrinya. I took them back to Eritrea to connect them to their culture, as well as taking them to Jamaica to do mine. I am blessed to have friends from the community that are very helpful. But I find it very hard, and I do these panels and discussions and join these groups because I want to give this to my children. And because my Tigrinya is not very good, and I wasn't born in Eritrea, and as much as I go back and contribute and give to family back home, it's still not enough to give my children a connection of culture that she and I both wanted them to have while she was on this earth. So I think the thing is that I join these panels to get a better understanding and to give them the culture that we agreed that I would give them. So I think that's why I'm here. So a lot of times, this discussion today was probably one of the most profound, open-minded, and one of the most educated and thought out discussions I've been a part of, because they don't acknowledge the fact that a lot of times it's just as simple, like they said, like a lot of times there are Black people that were here, try to have discussions with our African brothers and sisters, and it's not very easy. I think that some of the dialogue gets lost, and it's like, well, you're better than you, I'm better than you, no, you're better than me, hey, I made room for you. So I think the thing is, as long as we keep talking about it and having these discussions, I have faith that what I'm trying to give my kids will come to fruition, and that we will be better, because I really believe that none of us can be successful with helping the diaspora until we accomplish or set the ground rules here. Just as I've also discussed with Jewish leaders about what their politics and policies and how they're able to influence policies here to help Israel, we and ourselves must do the same so that we can help Africa. That's just my 2 cents.
Chuck, I'm speechless, to be frank with you.
Yeah, I just want to say that was so beautiful, and I'm so sorry for your loss. But
thank you.
Yeah, no, we're very, very happy that you're here with us today. I mean, this is the sort of discussion that we wanted to facilitate. So thank you for sharing with us. And honestly, we hope for you to engage in EYMP going forward with your children.
I will. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. So Team, if there's anything else from our core team, any other comments before we wrap up?
We just have one ask. Please fill out the brief survey that I put into the chat. We just want to know what you guys are looking for while we're in this virtual period of time. So just take 30 seconds to fill that out and we appreciate it.
May I also just say how grateful I am to you guys, the core team, for putting this together. I enjoyed this discussion. I learned something new every day. So well done. And I know this took a lot of work. So I just wanted to personally thank you guys for all the work that you did to pull this together. So.
Thank you, Aruba. I think the discussion in itself was worth the time and then some. So thank you all panelists for your time and sharing. Thank you to all the audience members that have joined. And to everyone, please continue to engage with EYMP. The information is on the screen. We look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks.
You. Good afternoon.